Hi everyone, today we are going to look at electron configurations. So, let's jump into it. Electrons are actually placed in these funky looking orbitals. So we've got our s orbitals here, p orbitals here, and d orbitals here. And each orbital's got its own suborbitals. We'll talk about that in a second. So let's see. Electron configuration is how the electrons are arranged in an atom. We can write the electron configuration using certain notation and orbital diagrams. All right, so for carbon, the electron configuration is 1s2, 2s2, 2p2. So we'll figure out where all these numbers come from in a second. Let's take a look. So the 1 is the energy level it's in. So we've been talking a lot about the Bohr model. All right, so this would be the first energy level. This might be the second energy level. That's one way you might think about energy level. And then the S here is the different sub-level of that energy level. And then the 2 tells you how many electrons. That's going to be important. So if you recall, carbon has 6 electrons, and in its configuration, notice in total, if we add all these numbers up, we get 6 electrons. Okay, so each sublevel can hold a certain number of electrons. The S sublevel can hold 2 electrons. The P sublevel can hold 6 electrons. The D sublevel can hold 10, and we're not really going to see F too much. So again, going back to carbon, this top number tells us how many electrons there are, and so carbon has 2 electrons in the p orbital here, and it's got other electrons in the s orbitals. So we're going to figure out how did we get to this eventually, and you'll learn what all of this is. Okay, the Aufbau principle states that electrons fill orbitals that have the lowest energy first. Okay, so how do we apply this? So this is the order in which electrons are filled. It tells you the sublevels and each energy level. So, for example, the second energy level only has s and p suborbitals, and we start from the bottom. So we always start with 1s, and the max we can hold is 2. And so let's, again, practice this. How would we do this? So basically, we're going to go from 1s to 2s. After 2s, we're going to go to p. After that, 3s, 3p, so on and so forth. So we're going to follow this order because this is the lowest energy first. And we're filling it from lowest energy to higher energy. Okay? So the order is going to be 1s, 2s, 2p, and then 3s, 3p, 4s, 4d, 4p, 5s, etc. Okay, we want to keep in mind those maximums for the, that didn't turn out well. So it says write the electron configuration for nitrogen. So how do we do this? First you want to figure out for nitrogen, how many electrons? So how about you answer that for me? Nitrogen has 7 electrons. So if you said 7, good job. You found nitrogen on the periodic table. And so to follow the Aufbau principle, we're going to do this order. You always start with 1s. So in an s orbital, so I've got 7 electrons total. In this first s orbital, the max it can hold was 2. Right? We mentioned that earlier. Once it's all filled up, we move on to the next orbital, 2s. And because this is a s suborbital, the max this can hold is 2 as well. Now it's all filled up. I move on to the next one, 2p. I've only got 3 electrons left, and the p orbital can hold up to 6. So I'm going to put the rest of my electrons here. So the correct answer here is 1s2, 2s2, 2p3. A little confusing, I know, so let's do more practice problems. So sodium, first thing you want to figure out, how many electrons? (11 electrons). So again, we're just filling up the lower levels of energy first before we continue on. So we always start with 1s, 2. Again, 2 is the max you can have in an s orbital. 2s, 2, because 2 is the most you can have in an s orbital. And then we move on to 2p. How many can we put in a p orbital? 6. So we're going to continue to put electrons in there. And now I'm up to 10 electrons. I still have one more. So I'm going to move on to my next suborbital, 3s, and I'll put my last electron there. Again, notice if you want to check your answers, we can add all these up and it'll add up to 11. And that's how you know all your electrons are accounted for. Okay, let's do a few more examples. Calcium. How many electrons are in calcium? 20 is correct. So again, you start with your lowest energy level, always 1s. And in case you forget, the order is also up here. After 1s, 2s. We could fit 2 of them. 2p, we can fit 6 in there. After 2p is 3s. I can fit 2 electrons in an s orbital. After that is 3p. I can fit 6 in there. So I've got 18 electrons so far. And then after that is my 4s. I can fit 2 electrons there. So 1s2, 2s2, 2p6, 3s2, 3p6, 4s2. Alright, so the last example, chromium. How many electrons? Go ahead and find a chromium, Cr. 24 electrons is correct. So let's start with 1s2. Hopefully you kind of get the hang of this when you practice it. Again, I'm filling up the lower energy levels first, and then moving on to the higher energy levels. And I'm placing these electrons in those energy levels. Okay, so right now I've got 20 electrons. I still have 4 more, and so after 4s is actually 3d. And the 3d orbital can hold up to 10. So that means I can put the rest of my electrons in there. And voila, this all adds up to 24. I can check my answer. And that's it. Go ahead and practice these on your own. Keep in mind the maximum numbers. So S can hold 2, P can hold 6, and the d orbital can hold 10. And then you just want to fill it in according to this order, just like those examples that we did. Make sure to ask me questions if you have trouble with this lesson.